Hey guys, this is Mike Keenan here. Today I'm going to go over how to configure user ID on a Palo Alto firewall, as well as configure the service account on Windows Active Directory. So looking at our environment here, you can see that we have a Windows 10 computer, we have a Windows Server 2012, and we have a Palo Alto firewall, as well as a web server. It's just a simple Apache web server with some web content. So what does user ID give us? Well, in a traditional access control rule, in a traditional ACL, what we would do is we would say allow Windows 10 to talk to, and Windows 10 being at 10.2.2.10 is his IP address, allow him to talk to the web server at 10.3.3.10. So we would say 10.2.2.10 allow him to talk to 10.3.3.10. This is a traditional access control rule, or access control entry in this case. So what would happen is Windows 10 would come over here, and then right here it would evaluate the interface ACLs to see if it's allowed. Now that's on a traditional firewall, your classic vanilla IP address to IP address using HTTP or something like that. But what user ID allows us to do is, instead of using an IP address, we can use a username. So we can use Bob. We can say allow Bob, no matter what IP address that he might be sourcing from, wherever in the company that he is, allow Bob and only Bob, or if we wanted to, we can say allow a group of users. So in this case, for example, we would say if Bob is part of engineering, allow engineering access to the web server, and engineering may have Bob, Sally, and Dave. So Bob, Sally, and Dave being part of the engineering group, what we could say is allow all of these users that are in this group access to the web server. That's pretty neat. Now, how does it do that? Well, what happens is the Palo Alto firewall is going to periodically query the Windows server and look at his security log. Now, anytime a Windows PC authenticates to a domain controller, in this case Windows Server 2012, when that happens, the Windows server is going to look to make sure that the username and password are correct, and then he'll authenticate Bob and allow Bob to be able to log into the Windows 10 computer. Now every time it does that, it creates a security log entry. Now in that security log entry, what we can see is that Bob logged in from 10.2.2.10 or 10.2.2.15. It doesn't matter what his IP address is. You could come from 10.5.5.10. Instead of using a static IP address or subnet, what we can do is say use that entry that we saw in the security log and dynamically associate Bob with the IP address, in this case being 10.2.2.10, and allow Bob access to the web server. So let's go ahead and get into the configuration. So we're going to start off on the Windows server. We're going to go to Active Directory, Users and Computers, and we're going to create a new user. This is going to be the service account that we use, or that the Palo Alto firewall is going to use when it logs into the Windows server to look at those security logs. And create a new user, and we're just going to name him user ID. And we're going to give him a password. And he doesn't need to change his password the next time that he logs in, since this is a service account. And we're going to put him in a couple of different groups. We're going to add him to distributed COM. We're also going to add him to the event log readers. And finally, we're going to add user ID to server operators. So now what we're going to do is go into WMI control. We're going to go into properties, go to security. Now in the root folder, there's this folder called CIMV2. We're going to click security and we're going to add user ID to this folder's security. And we're going to go ahead and allow remote enable and read security. And that's all the configuration that we need to do on the server. So now let's go to the firewall and configure it as well. So we're going to start off by going to device. And we're going to go to setup and we're going to go to services. Now what we need to do here is we need to create a couple of service routes. The reason for that is because if we look at our topology here, over here you can't see it, but there's actually a management interface that I'm connected to. Now by default on a Palo Alto firewall, all local services, all traffic that is sourced from the firewall itself goes out of the management interface. So we want to change that so it goes out of the inside interface up here for certain services. So we're going to create some service routes. Go to customize. We're going to start off with DNS and we're going to use the inside interface. And this is an object here that I've created. It's gateway inside, which is a object that has the attribute 10.2.2.1, which is the inside interface IP address of the Palo Alto firewall. And hit OK. We're also going to change Kerberos. Hit OK. LDAP. Hit OK. And finally, UID agent. And we'll hit OK. One other thing that we need to do in here is we need to go to destination and we need to add a destination. So we're going to add our domain controller, which is, we're going to call it Windows Server 2012. And we're going to say use the source IP address of the inside interface, which is that 10.2.2.1 address. And hit OK. The next thing we're going to do is go to user identification. For server monitoring, we're going to create a new object. And the same thing, Windows Server 2012. We're going to keep it on Active Directory. And the network address is going to be 10.2.2.200 because that's the IP address of the Windows domain controller. Now we're going to click the cogwheel up here on the top right. Now we're going to start off by putting in the username starting with the domain. So Michael Keenan being the domain, with user ID being the user. We're going to use the same password that we used to create the service account from before. And hit OK. Now what we need to do is go to Network, click on Inside, and Enable User Identification. And now we need to create some interface management profiles, or an interface management profile. We're going to call it Local Services. We're going to allow ping, user ID, user ID SSL, and user ID UDP. And we're going to add, just for this lab environment, we're going to permit 10.0.0.0/8. And finally, we're going to create our policy. I'm going to call it user auth. Source is going to be the inside zone, and the destination is going to be the DMZ. We're going to allow web browsing, and we're also going to allow ping. Hit OK. We're going to put it above the default deny. And that should be it. Let's see if it works. Fingers crossed. Let's go to device. Now over here, you should see this should change to connected. Let it commit. And it's not connected. Let's go ahead and go to our policies. I'm going to get rid of this default deny here. And see if that helps. And we're still getting connection timed out. There we go. Connected. That's what we want to see. So now what we're going to do is test to see if we have connectivity. I go over here to my Windows 10 PC. Go ahead and log in. And let's see if we can reach the web server. And there it is. Let's go back to our Palo Alto, look at the policy, and there you can see that the rule's incrementing. So we have successfully configured user ID and the service account. Now I'm going to show you a helpful command to be able to see the user ID mappings on the CLI. The command that we're going to use is show user IP user mapping all. And what that'll show us here is that here's my username, Keenan, associated with the IP address 10.2.2.10. And that's all there is to it, configuring user ID on a Palo Alto firewall. I hope you liked this video. I hope you learned something. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.